Yay! Okay, we're here. We made it. Okay, so this is supposed to be kind of more of a retrospective or reflection call, just to kind of look back on the 6 reading group sessions we've hosted over the last, I guess, 6-ish, 7 months. And it's a pretty short agenda, but I think there could be lots to talk about, but probably not to spend too much time reflecting back too far, and just make sure, I think it'd be good to devote a bunch of the time to thinking about how to effectively coordinate ahead. And with that said, is someone able to take notes? I think someone has already taken over. Oh, Kevin, thank you. And yeah, so the first topic was just at a high level, if we wanted to revisit, and I think we chatted a little bit about this in a couple of the calls, but like what was working and what didn't, I think it would be nice to also just like surface that here now. Go B5.
Yeah, I think the one that I'd start with the obvious just because I think it's not valuable even to point it out, but like sort of the more academic, very syllabus-based approach of, now I'm sort of showing my bias by saying very academic, and to others that may not seem academic at all, but I really appreciated having, for me, I really gravitated and enjoyed the reading because it had a more learn something, acquire a new piece of knowledge. Yeah, for me that was really, really, really valuable, and I felt like, the joy of schooling. And so big thumbs up for that.
I was just going to call it the thing that we have said repeatedly worked was all the work that Tom put in of selecting stuff to discuss and then making sure there was at least some sense of a framing of ways to dig into the topic. It was, you had a light touch about how you set up the recommended reading and the suggested discussion, but it still was obviously a fair amount of work, and it made a big difference in terms of the quality of the discussion and the experience of reading through the stuff, because there was like a cohesiveness to the things fitting together. And a thing that could change is maybe when we make the lists, it seemed like more towards the end you started calling out the number of pages in the suggested readings. That was actually useful. So I would make sure to do that in next round.
Yeah, can I maybe ask a specific follow-up to you all on that, which was, so our original agreement or pitch was that we would say 1 core reading, which was trying to be in the 30-page range, and that sometimes spread across a few, like on the opening one, it was like a few articles, right, which roughly worked out to 30 pages. So we said 1 core plus these extra ones, but we kind of really wound up being like, try and read all of it. And so I don't know whether people thought that worked or not. And also the balance of how, like, the tenor or the audience that the readings were for. Like we had some really heavy academic weeks. We had some weeks that were fairly mixed. How did that, was there a difference in how people received that? Yeah, go Kelsey.
I specifically really liked, I wasn't there for all of it, but I specifically really liked the last set of readings in terms of challenge and time it took to read and process it. That was the one where I found myself taking notes in a separate document to refer to during the meeting, and it was not onerous. Versus the previous one, the privacy one, it was super interesting. I loved those readings. I ended up reading the entirety of both of the books that were associated with it. But it was a lot, even just to do the assigned part. So that's not necessarily helpful, but.
No, super helpful. Yeah, go Rob.
I just feel like they were almost always really good and really interesting readings that I, in many cases, would not have found myself. So I kind of endeavored to read them all for that reason. So I was super happy about it, and mostly it felt, to me, it mostly felt well paced in that, like, the one larger reading and then other smaller things meant I could generally accomplish that reading before the group, and then I could follow on and read the entire rest of whatever book after the actual group meetup. The only time that was frustrating was when, like a week later, after reading the rest of the book, I would discover that like other people on the call had clearly read like most of the rest of the book, and see things in the discussions that I was like, oh, that seems complicated, or like, I'm not sure I get it. And then realize a week later, like, oh, that's because there was a lot more discussion about this particular thing in like the next chapter or like 2 chapters down the road. But I think that's the thing I shouldn't have been surprised by anyway, that like other people who might have had more time would have read more of it beforehand instead of afterwards, like me.
And maybe just sort of on this tear, what about the types of readings being like a lot were from books? And so, I mean, I'm able to get those chapters fairly easy, and and sort of was able to share them. And there was a lot, there were a good chunk of the ones, especially people writing within like this space, whatever that actually means, are publishing them openly online. I don't know, like, how did that balance feel? Like, it's interesting to hear. I'm surprised, but that's great that it sounds like so many of you have already gone back to it, or like really tried to dig in and read more from one of the selections. Yeah, go. I see Brendan and then Matt said.
Yeah, personally, like I can remember the initial one on, I think it was decentralization, where we Brewster Kahl's like blog post was one of them, and I sort of found that that was one of the few like sort of more blog oriented, like more fast paced sort of publication, or fast paced in the general sense. I really appreciated slow paced, like pulling from books. But the one thing I would call out is obviously the challenge of like having to get access to articles that aren't always available, which is just like not something I think we should spend any time on, because it's just a reality. And I think it's actually really worth it to be, as Rob was pointing out, just to be pointed to some of these resources, because I think 9/10 of these I would never have found had someone not sort of sent me in that direction. And so that in and of itself is like just super valuable to have a touch point to just continue to pull on.
Yeah, having the shared drive made a big difference. Having the stuff from the books, I tried reading them on my lap. I couldn't find the right reading medium to read them in a digital form, so I ended up partway through this semester, whatever we want to call this, I just print them out, and it's actually really nice having a thing that I can hold and that I can highlight and underline. So I'm actually kind of eager for the next round, because now I enjoy that so much. And I used to do that a lot and haven't done it in years, where I would like print out a 30-page thing and read it and like write all over it. And then you end up with this like collection of things you've read that you can hand to other people, which I literally did. I met a guy at a bar and was having a conversation, had just finished reading an article. It's like, here, read it.
That's like a sign of success. I pass on so many things I read, and I always feel like that's like some sort of mark of like, if I get to talk about it with someone else, I'm usually pretty happy. Are there any more kind of like, I think it feels like we're grouped around readings right now. Are there any other thoughts on that people want to share? Because I have another thought about what worked, what didn't, that I wanted to check in on. Go, Rob.
I mean, in terms of things that worked less well, I feel like, especially in the second half of it, I guess, we didn't have the reading selections planned out very far in advance. And so sometimes it felt like there was a very short amount of time between the time I actually knew what we were reading and the reading group. And your ability to put a lot of the stuff in the shared drive helped make that less painful. So that was a good thing, because sometimes it was too short to like find a way to acquire the thing, because often some of the readings were obscure enough or academic enough that like I would have to get them through like interlibrary loan, which always takes longer. So
Yeah, totally fair point. Like we sort of budgeted a month also to try and give people time to read, but I think in particular once there was a week, which is a pretty tight turnaround. And I think the last two was probably only 2 weeks. So that's like a shorter circuit. Sorry, did I cut you off, Matt Zed? I think maybe you had a thought too. Oh, okay. That is a good point. Thanks for raising it. The other one I wanted to ask about and is say that I think Matt P and I's original hope or thought was that some people would feel able or interested in taking on facilitating, but maybe it wasn't scoped or framed really well. I know Megahertz, you did one session on Commons, and so maybe just. I was wondering if we could chat a little bit about that, in particular, thinking about how to make this, like how to do this next time and how to think about cutting out extra work where possible, or, streamlining. Go Kelsey.
So I was thinking about, I had the urge in some of these readings to try and nominate additional readings. Is my audio good? I know I'm in the wind. Okay. And there isn't really a mechanism for nominating readings, which makes a lot more work for the facilitator. And it doesn't necessarily have to be like that. I was wondering if maybe this time we wanted to have a decision on a theme, on a set of themes. I don't know how you did this before, but it seemed like a lot of single work. But a decision on a set of themes, and then people could nominate readings to a folder, and then whoever decided to facilitate could then pull out of that a theming. And part of the reason I hesitate a little bit on this nominations idea is like the stuff that I would have nominated for privacy would totally not have gone with the direction that discussion ended up going, right? And that's because, and that was part of what was really cool about it, was you had this totally different take on what privacy discussion we were going to have than I was expecting us to have. So I don't want to reduce the role of the facilitator as somebody who gets you to talk about something that's really specific or unusual. But I don't know, I guess I have a question for you, Dawn, which is along the lines of, did you feel like you had to go and find readings versus like already kind of knew some that you'd want to work on? Because if so, maybe we could solve that problem.
And sorry, thank you for that prompt too. I should maybe say a bit of context for people who aren't involved in the planning. So we did choose the themes from the beginning. So we had these sort of 6. Some of them were very empty buckets. Like we were like, we should talk about this, but we don't know. But around most of them, I think Matt Price and I had like already selected 1 or 2 core readings, and kind of knew that for the latter half of the ones that we talked about, that was where we hadn't selected the readings, but we knew that there were people who were like providing alternative approaches. So I had read most of the things before that ended up going in there, or read stuff by those authors before, or I'd like seen them lecture and then like went back through and kind of to select things. And so we did say or encourage, but I think the way that we did it, the process was not good. Was we had like a GitHub issue, and we were like, if anyone wants to throw any readings for this theme here, and so they were opened for the whole period of the reading. But that wound up, I think, maybe not exclusively, but primarily being the people who took on the facilitating role. So Matt P and I wound up using that space to organize. And when people did surface other readings, it actually came out of the calls. So I'm just also thinking about whether people would go to a new place and add stuff in between. Some people will. I think maybe that flow might not catch everyone who has something that would be relevant. But I think some sort of mechanism for getting a wide array of people to submit potential readings is like a great thing. Like I think we should improve that. The other place we hid them was like the bottom of the README. Like it was not good, right? Like I did like a trawl through like all of these readings to pull stuff up, did a lot of searching, and pulled out like people who had been cited by other authors to like make a long list. And so I had even thoughts that we could bring up for next year. But yeah. Yeah, go Rob.
I mean, for what it's worth on that, I felt like I saw all those calls, but if other people didn't, then they probably might not have been visible enough. I just never submitted anything because I didn't feel like I ever had anything to submit. The thing that was super wonderful and valuable about the reading group to me was that it kept surfacing things that I would not have found. So for me, it was something to like pull new things from rather than me having much to push into. From my perspective, that's what I felt like. So I guess what I really want to say is like, don't feel bad if I didn't suggest anything. And sometimes I felt bad because that call for suggestions seemed like, please somebody come up with more stuff. And I always felt like, I don't know. So.
I mean, like, I think there's a thread here that we might just want to pick up at sort of at the end of the call when we think about setting it up for next year. So we don't necessarily have to belabor the point. But I mean, I think for me, it was trying to balance kind of both. I think sometimes if you're facilitating, you need enough like closure. So you have like ownership over the thing that you're supposed to think about to come up with ideas around. So if it's like too open, it can almost be difficult to like start, but also not cut off people who had things to say about the topic. So I think there's just sort of figuring out how to balance that. In this case, because I had helped plan it, it was really easy for me to be like, oh, you know, I had these initial thoughts about these topic areas. I can do this. But I don't know what the right way would be to invite other people in around specific ones, especially thinking about, you know, if next semester is a little less like pre-planned all the way in advance, then we'll need to have some flexibility around how people kind of sign up to facilitate and pick a topic and then maybe get suggested readings, but then do that work of tailoring. Yeah, go B5.
Yeah, I want to make sure we don't spend too long because I know you have other topics you want to cover, Don. But I think one of the themes that's jumping out at me is like the value that a lot of us got out of this actually derived from having people who were familiar enough with the material and planned far enough in advance. And those two things are very difficult to replicate, but I think that's really where a lot of the value showed up. Like, and I thought that it only further created more virtuous outcomes when people sort of were able to tack on, oh, now that I sort of, because there's sort of a calcified center that you could pivot around when someone said, okay, the topic today is, you know, the commons, and we're going to read around this area. And then it was like, oh, I can now connect my thinking from this other area to this. And I think that's why you got a lot of stuff in the call. Like only during the conversation did I was like, oh yes, I have read things that I thought were tangentially related, but now hearing it sort of makes sense. And so I can sort of connect the dots. So I know that this, maybe one thing I'd like to sort of table as like a possibility is that we try really hard to maintain that advanced planning. Like I'd love to like sort of sign up to pick a topic and and know that it's going to be in like 9 months, and that I have to go read it and make sure that I've covered like a proper amount of stuff in that time. And I'd make a point of like picking a topic that I can at bare minimum today, like could rhyme off something that is valuable on. But like really, really, really far in advance, so that you have that person who can still provide that sort of calcified core that I think was really, really, really like what made this such a success. And if that's the case, then the question becomes like the coordination of this massive advanced labor, like and making sure that people actually follow through.
Yeah, maybe Matt said.
Yeah, I mean, echoing that, I guess I would just restate when I say that part of what worked was all the work that Don put in, maybe stating it more in the general, having the facilitator for each week was someone who had read all of the stuff for that week in advance and had their own notion of how those things fit together in their own head, or some cohesive relationship between those. Having someone who had done all of that advanced work before and then then there was a final pass of choosing what was in the list before everyone read it. That was really valuable. I'm not saying that's the only thing that could work, but that worked really well this time. And so I understand that obviously that was a lot of work and maybe we can't repeat it.
So I mean, it kind of feels like we're actually at a looking forward moment now. So we're kind of taking from what we've just discussed and sort of thinking ahead. I had staggered these maybe in the wrong order in the agenda, which was we should look at all of the wild and wonderful, exciting ideas we raised and then talk about how to do it. But maybe because we're already talking about how to do it, do we want to just kind of transition into that and actually try and almost like itemize out what we think needs to happen to set it up for next time? And I think we can sort of have it feels like we have some quick bullet points and then we can link them, to changes that need to be made, because I think we have at least a very rough scaffold around some of these bits. Does that sound okay? So turning to kind of explicating how we want to manage coordinate next round based on some of the things that people have just said. Kelsey, are you okay on phone? I feel like you're maybe, yeah? Okay. Okay.
Sorry, I misunderstood you, John. You're suggesting that we jump past discussing topics and themes and go straight to how we want to manage or coordinate.
Yeah, and then we do that now and then go to topics and themes.
Okay.
Does that feel okay? So maybe just to repeat back what I've heard from you that feels like a stub is some way of, like, I'd say some clearer facilitation guidelines about what prep work might look like. We have some very minimal ones now, but maybe in line with what you articulated, Matt said, it sounds like we do want some degree of a structure around, like, so we don't want to break totally from a semester format and go into like a by the month, like we're just building the bridge 1 month out ahead of us. We want a little bit of an arc to these things. And then it also sounded like we wanted to maybe identify some things about like amount of time that people will need to read, or like access to readings and things like that. And Kelsey flagged also sort of the process for collecting new readings and then helping pick them down and tie them to themes. Those kind of feel like the places that we want to work around. Matt said, I think.
And my comment had been less around the idea of a whole semester thematically being cohesive, and more that, like, for each installment, the person who was facilitating that had done a lot of advanced work, primarily in reading all the stuff, probably also reading other stuff that they chose not to include on the list, and then saying, this is a great set of things for this discussion. And so that, like, we could have multiple people doing that for each installment. We could have different people doing that for each installment, or teams of people, as Brendan said in the chat. But, like, I don't know. As in that semester sense, I don't know that we need to have like a semester arc where, like, it was some grand vision of how all the ideas are going to click together over the
DT 322.
Yeah, no, fair enough. I mean, I think the semester, the theme or the arc of the semester is like basically that this is a seminar series, right? So each month could be distinct. But I think there would be some degree of us planning like a semester at a time, whatever that looks like. I mean, I would recommend that if we are going that way, we maybe stick to a fairly well-established semester schedule that most of us, not most of us, a chunk of us in Edgy spend our lives on. But just I'll throw that out there.
Yeah, I also just want to chime in and say that I think that the semester format also keeps it discrete, which means that people aren't like, oh, I'm signing up to show up for this forever or facilitate this forever. There is, okay, there will be 6 of these. And that, for me, means that we have a chance to discretize. Like, the fact that we're all sitting in a reflection meeting on something is really, I think, important, and that everyone, but there's also just the attendee fatigue of like, do I just go to these forever? Like, when does this stop? And I think it's really helpful to have like, okay, cool. There's going to be a set number of these.
Okay, that sounds good. So that would actually maybe shorten the arc, right? So that could be imagining like 4, doing like planning 4 at a time. And we did successfully do one over the summer. I was like pretty impressed with the fact that we all showed up to, especially the ones in like August. We did so much work in August. I'm actually a little flabbergasted, but we should give ourselves a pat on the back for that. So that maybe also remains to be seen as like, maybe we need a pause in between things. And so maybe we do like 5 months or something and not do something in the core of the summer. So maybe just looking at the other things that I threw out that we haven't touched on, I think one of the things Rob brought up was like the amount of time for reading and sort of like access to it. So actually, this is one thing we have not talked about before. We did monthly. Was that fast enough? Too slow? Like Matt Price had flagged, that's actually, that can almost be too long to like remember the thread of why you're doing a thing. It maybe didn't seem to be an issue for us, but in academic things that I'm used to, that you usually are meeting weekly or bi-weekly just because you're trying to like maintain momentum. So what did people find? Go Matt, Zed, and then Rob.
Monthly, having a month, it was usually like within a month, I could find time where I was going to do most of that reading, right? Like so it gave me wiggle room of like when to find the free time to do all the reading. And if it was less than that month, there would have been some months that I just didn't. If it was only on it, sometimes I have 2 weeks where I'm just too busy and wouldn't have the free time to do that reading.
I would say similarly, although I think I wound up packing most of the reading for any given group into the week beforehand. But there were definitely like 1 or 2 where I felt like I hardly had any time in the month leading up to it. So it was really good that there was that much time, although most of the time I felt like it was too long. So I think what my feeling on that is that I don't know that I'd make it any shorter than like 1 week shorter. So like 3 or 4 weeks between them. So like I feel like maybe they were like slightly far apart, but having it monthly makes it easy. But I wouldn't make them like way closer together because I would, like Matt, maybe have trouble finding the time if it was way closer together.
Yeah, okay, actually that's good to flag. I think once we took 5 weeks and then once it was like 3. We did some like juggling. Actually, I think because of the DWeb Summit, but it kind of hears like kind of a monthly cycle, and that I think is totally fine. And also maybe because these are discrete sessions, that is okay that they're not so close together. And so to the other question about amount of time, like should we sort of specify like we would want to have the readings distributed like more than 2 weeks in advance? It kind of almost sounds like we're saying monthly, right? Like so they're like picked by the previous session for the upcoming session.
I think that sounds like a great idea. Like if we knew what we were reading for session 3 at the time that we held session 2, I feel like that would be about right, or at least very useful.
Okay, so by previous session. So Kevin, thank you for these amazing notes below. They're so awesome. I've also been going up above and like adding to the bullet point below because I imagine that might be the stub of like what we write up as like a throw it in a read me somewhere. It's like my favorite thing. Let's put them in a read me somewhere, but no one will read.
That's great. That's great.
So then the other big piece was this like process for collecting new readings and how to pick them and tie them to themes. Oh, no big deal. Just that small little chestnut. So I should say that we decided already that we were gonna not use GitHub and the README for collecting the readings. And so we started that Zotero, said it right, group that is publicly viewable. So anyone can look at it. And I'm sorry to propose yet another service, but it has been done. Actually, no one was feeling my like BibTech love. Like, I guess I'm the only one who's like really into like eventually bringing things down to LaTeX, and like, yeah, whatever. I have the worst system for maintaining my bibliography, but we'll leave that aside. So we have this public Zotero group, which is, I mean, it used to just only be browser-based. Now I think to do a lot of work with it, you probably are, you can log in and do it from the browser, but to manage it, you're probably going to have to install a desktop extension because of the way that Firefox extensions changed, I think. So it's not, it sort of has a desktop component to it now, which is sort of new, but if other people have experience with citation managers like Mendeley, or if there's other ones, I think JabRef is the other big open source one. It's kind of in that zone. I kind of wanted to ask the question if people would see themselves using that to propose readings. So this would be a different kind of barrier to entry, right? So instead of being like checking a new place on GitHub, so it would be like a new issue or something. So it would be like, would people, could they imagine using this as a place where they could just, as they go about finding stuff, they could be adding it to it? Go Matt said.
So I just don't have the experience of using Zotero in this way. Are we able to create like buckets that would be the readings for a certain installment, and is there a way for us to discuss them? So it could be, you could say things like, I read this, should we do, like, is that a good one for it? And another person could say, that looks interesting, but I don't think it fits for that week, right? Or like, does it have a means for having that kind of conversation? Or is it, I think of Zotero as just like literally like tracking all your citations.
Yeah, it has some ability to like annotate things, but it is in no way well formed for discussion. So anything I would annotate would sync and other people could see it, and you can definitely, there's a folder system. So you can definitely be throwing things in like a potential bucket, and then you could like make the themes and put them in there. And if you're like facilitating or setting up a session, you could use that. But it would not be easy to have a conversation asynchronously with this tool. And so if, in terms of actually like helping kind of get down to a smaller amount of readings, then it might not provide enough support.
Could you say why you prefer to try Zotero instead of using GitHub?
I mean, I don't actually. I think Zotero is good for like maintaining the citations over time, like as a nice like way to look back and see them all. I think that's really beautiful and helpful. And also it's good for if, say, people want to do any writing down the road. Because I am like a little compulsive, everything that's in there is like the fields are all correct. So that's like a benefit of like generating citations from it now. Yeah, like I don't think it has to be the tool for that. I'm just sort of maybe responding to the fact that I'm not sure if people feel like GitHub is the right place to do the coordinating, or it hasn't sort of seemed to be like maybe helpful for folks. So I'm just trying to think of other options. Yeah, go Brendan.
Yeah, I'm wondering sort of like what the goal is. I know that obviously we want to get more, sort of collective input and feedback around reading selection and the sort of canon of stuff that we sort of discuss. But I think the like actual video calls are really, really powerful. And like, I don't know how much like outside discussion of that is like something we need to be like losing our minds over. I don't know. I apologize. I'm just trying to like prioritize and be like, do we need to like reinvent this? And yeah.
I mean, can I just restate what I think the goal is? Because maybe I just have not said it clearly, and then let me know, because I'm not sure I understand what your proposal back is. So I think the goal is that we want to make sure we have a process that supports us collecting a bunch of new readings. So that doesn't require one person to do it. So anyone could be like, hey, I think this might be interesting. Kind of help winnow them down or group them to themes. And then also like facilitate that final like moment where someone has to like look through a bunch and then curate a short list in advance of a session. So were you saying that we should use call time to do that, or that on this call right now is probably not the best time to hash out that process? I wasn't entirely sure I followed.
Because I misunderstood the goal. Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. Now, like because to me, it was like in the calls, people are bringing up readings, and we're at like in small places, and that's helpful. But we're referring to the process of actually generating new sort of topics, or maybe not topics, but like new seminars based around stuff that people are bringing up, and that's I think that's a tooling question.
Yeah, I'd go on that side.
Maybe a way to approach it is, it seems like the curation of a list for a particular installment seems to be predominantly done by one or two people who are facilitating for that. And so then you don't really need a GitHub issue for that discussion. And so doing it, and I definitely agree that having it in Zotero I think adding things to Zotero is a little bit cleaner. And the result of having it put in Zotero has more legs to it. So the fact that Zotero is not designed for discussion, I think, is maybe not a killer. I'm certainly open to trying using Zotero. I always lean towards using it again, and then I don't, because I don't have enough momentum behind it. So this helps me put more momentum behind organizing all of my references and citations.
Okay, so what if, I also think we can try and make a sort of an adjusted process for the next semester or next cycle. And then if it doesn't work, we can change it. And I actually wasn't clear about this before, but thank you for flagging that said, like, so actually it's pretty easy for anyone to very quickly, without leaving the place that they are checking out a thing, to add it to Zotero. There's just the one-click button that is like on most browsers extension. So I would also say that I would encourage anyone, even if they don't plan to be facilitating it, to feel like they can add stuff to it, because it's like very easy to. That doesn't address the other issues of like not feeling like maybe able to for a specific theme. But if we're talking about just kind of building a long list of potential readings, then I think, that's a much wider open space than having to try and immediately put them onto a smaller theme. And then, however, the people who are taking up being a facilitator, like decide to work with another person or alone to like actually choose that short list, I think is fine. Like we don't have to maybe specify that as going through a GitHub issue or something yet. So maybe what we're saying is that we'll be collecting new readings using the Zotero group. So to do that, you do need to be invited into it. And I think everyone who's joined, I've tried to make an owner, just so anyone can invite anyone. But maybe just to make sure too after this that I can get people on this who aren't. And so maybe the way to pin down readings is actually try what Brendan proposed at the beginning of like, let's get people assigned to topics and dates, and then kind of leave them a little bit of space to figure out their exact mechanism. And we can have pair facilitation, like obviously Matt Bryce and I did that almost every time. So like that I think is a good format. So that's sort of like up to facilitator. And then for the tying them down, I think one of your obligations as a facilitator is that by the meeting before, if that makes sense, you have updated the reading list. So what we used as kind of the canonical source was the README. I don't know if that feels okay for people. I think that the landing page of the GitHub repo is probably an okay place to continue for this next round, if that feels okay. Okay, so facilitators, update README. And I should also say, like if people have questions about access or like thinking about access to resources or to articles, like they should, I mean, like I'm happy to help with that. Okay, does that feel like it kind of covers the bases? Kelsey, maybe you're not able to respond right now, but I think you had raised that concern or that thought. And so maybe where I see this being codified is we wrote that little paragraph blurb about facilitator guidelines. So I think we'll just update it to sort of document these processes. And that's also in the README, sort of, I think somewhere buried at the bottom. So that's like an action item or something. And I'm happy to take that on. Okay, so then in the time we have left, maybe we could look at these exciting topics and maybe actually we could try and do a little bit of shortlisting of them for next semester. I don't know if we have to have people sign up for them for next semester, but I think it'd be cool if we could just do a little bit of cleaning of the long list. And also maybe having people think about their availability. So under this new model, the availability would not be taking on planning a whole arc. It would be taking on facilitating like one session a semester. And actually, given the number of us, not that, right? Like some people wouldn't have to facilitate. And maybe if what people want is like a pair model or like people who want to kind of work with someone who is more experienced, we could also like aim to support that too. Okay, so this long list I just dumped in a GitHub issue because why not? And maybe this is not the best setup for like making a short list from unless I just try and copy and paste it really quickly into the bottom of the Google Doc. But do we want to maybe do that and look at it together there? Yeah, go on that side.
I think a Google Doc might be better because we should, reading through these topics, I think we should discuss, we should get clearer about what do we really want to do in each section. And some of them might get broken into saying, oh, this is actually 2 topics, that kind of thing, which works better in a Google document. Yeah,
so I mean, we now looking at the time, I probably should have done an hour and a half, but I was trying to be fast and it didn't work. I wonder if we have enough time to maybe fully discuss that today, but so maybe given that we have 10 minutes left, I want to ask people what they want to do. I think we could imagine a bit of a discussion that would take us over time if we wanted to do some of what Matt's talking about today for this list. I think that'd be worth doing, and I have time now, but I'm also happy to not and like let people go. But then maybe we want to just like check in on if people are able to commit to doing some degree of facilitation or coordination around this for next cycle. And also, I think a piece of it might be even maybe someone who doesn't facilitate, but helps kind of shepherd the like, I almost feel like it'd be good to have someone who's like almost like I don't even know what analogy to use tied to semester, but someone who's like, oh yeah, we're on a semester cycle. Let's make sure that people have signed up to do, every slot. I feel like I've just been asking these really layered questions today that are not easy to respond to. So question 1, registrar. Are people, given that we have 10 minutes left, do people want to discuss the topics now? I see some thumbs up. Are there people who cannot stay? Okay. So let's have a very quick people commitment to availability, and then we'll move into discussing the topics, but it won't get finalized today, so there'll be room for people to provide feedback and help kind of winnow down. Okay, yeah, so just as a general, and I don't think this is like you're pinned down to something right now, but could people say whether they feel like they would be able to facilitate a session kind of in the winter semester, so between now to spring?
This is just time commitment, or do we feel like we're in a position to take on that time?
Yeah, just that.
I would like to, but I would like to partner with someone to keep me accountable.
Okay, and I know Eric also has indicated it as well, and he said he was interested. So that is an amount, but not a full amount of people, just flagging that. And then I'm also wondering if there is someone who feels like maybe not up to facilitating, but kind of up to maybe a degree of registrar/accountability work of like just making sure that some things get moved along or reminders go out if people haven't posted their stuff yet. Is someone feeling like they could take on that for the semester? Okay, I see a potential registrar. Ah. Cool. Okay. I mean, I feel like everyone's really keen on the reading group, so I don't doubt that stuff will happen. I think it's more just making sure that it doesn't all fall to one person. So I think it might be nice to try and cleave apart the facilitation and the registrar.
Is that what a registrar does?
No.
Or is that what a provost does?
Yeah, maybe a provost.
Or yeah, I think so. Or dean.
I just have
Give it Dean Brackett.
I just feel like being in an academic institution, I have like pretty loaded associations with all of these terms. So I'm like, I don't even know what baggage I want to put out there.
Course director.
Sure, yeah, course director.
Big fan of Dean Brackett.
Dean Brackett works.
I'm really excited. Need like a big desk. Some leather-bound books.
Awesome. Okay, cool. Well, so it sounds like we have some degree of amount of interest, and that we will have to get some props for our dean/registrar/PI. Cool. Okay, so why don't and again, like we'll maybe have to do an official just call for this once the list of topics is a little bit cleaner. So let's look at this list, and maybe if folks have to drop off at any time, do so. But why don't we just maybe spend a minute or two here together now, looking at it before we start talking.
We're just looking at the list in the GitHub issue.
Oh, I actually moved it into the Google Doc below.
Okay.
So maybe
Yes, copy pasted.
rejigging and editing below there.
All right.
Have people had a chance to look at it? Are there maybe some that they recall that were obviously missing? It would be good to even do some adding to it right now. Yeah, go Matt.
Yeah, I'm for some reason I'm view only, so otherwise I would just type it in. Stewardship as a topic, which we could potentially. Yeah, it doesn't cleanly fit under. Well, it fits with the custody and post-custodial data stewardship. Oh, and I would say like stewardship and care, which gets into the ethics of care, which I think we should read about.
Cool. Any other ones that seem that they didn't make it through? There was, okay, this isn't maybe a topic, but I was really struck by the, like, what were they called? Like, the debris rights from the sea. Do you remember that? It's like flotsam, jetsam, logum, something. But I don't know. I mean, I think we didn't really talk about rights, right? Like we talked about justice, and rights kind of came along there, but maybe there's a piece around that.
I think maybe, I don't know how this plays out, but I'm wondering if like thinking about counter-anti disintermediation and how it sort of started to touch onto the issue of incentive and incentive in relation to economics and like specifically like capitalistic versus and like dealing in finance. I don't know how to put a phrase around this, but maybe there's something there around financial incentives or incentive structures. But I don't know yet.
I'm just not sure. Okay, I'm gonna just call it financial incentive, but I feel like I might have missed. There might be another word around there to like. Yeah,
it'd have to be carefully carved around to like keep it from just smushing into everything else.
There's some feminist geographers, J.K. Gibson Graham, who they wrote this famous book, The End of Capitalism as We Know It, and they talk about, they've written some like also stuff that is very accessible, what's called Take Back the Economy. And it's kind of about untangling like financialization from the economy and like money. So there's like some, yeah, there's some stuff on there I think is interesting. Yeah, go Matt.
Well, with that, there's I keep coming back to the ownership could mean at least 3 distinct topics that would be good for us to discuss, and I think there's a lot of others. One of them is what you were just flagging, is sort of economics and capitalism and capital and that sense of ownership and the critique around that, or the things to consider and tease open in that topic. And then there's ownership in the sense of intellectual property and intellectual property rights and copyright, and should we read about something about that and about Creative Commons and all of those questions. And then the third one is possession. I don't know if there's stuff to read about this, but just the relationship between possession and ownership. Like possession is 9/10 of the law sense of basically I'm teasing apart, there's ownership in the abstract in the form of this is my intellectual property. In a contractual sense, I own that photo I posted on Facebook. And then there's the sense of ownership that comes from this is in my possession, and that imbues some form of ownership. And I think both of those are things to tease apart distinctly. And I don't know how to find reading on that possession one, but it's got to be out there. There's got to be stuff we can dig into there. I think those are all things we could dig into. And they all fit under the heading of ownership, but they're sort of different angles.
Yeah, maybe Rob, if you want to go, and then I wonder if we want to try and like, yeah, this was just the section of the readings that came out of, so I think we can like drop those headings and start to do some restructuring. But Rob, please go first.
I was just going to say, and maybe this is what Brendan was getting at, or just riffing off of what Brendan and you were saying about financial incentives and incentive structures in capitalism. This maybe feels like it's a lot more practical applicability than the readings that we've done have traditionally focused on, but something about like the fitting of alternative structures into like the overarching like capitalist structure that we have today. Like the intermediation of like different incentive structures and how they can fit into each other or around each other, that kind of thing. If that makes sense.
Sure, yeah, actually there's some like literature around networks and stuff that tries to draw on this notion of alternative, and there's like a way to think of how you position yourself like in resistance or like kind of beyond. So yeah, I'm aware of some literature around that, so I imagine more. Go Matt then.
I'm just generating a couple that we can add to the list and then rule out. Things like security, which could go in a bunch of different directions. Surveillance, which didn't come up as, I expected that to loom larger in the privacy one. You took it a different direction. I love the direction you took it, but we could dive into surveillance as a specific topic. I'm typing that now, so you don't need to type it again.
Yeah, go Brendan.
Yeah, and one other one, this might be outside of our sort of like decentralization pivot point, but algorithmic fairness is another really like, and particularly how it relates. I think it might be a nice subheading under justice, or like how certain types of algorithms sort of disincentivize certain groups or favor other groups or reinforce existing structures. I'm thinking a lot about Cathy O'Neill's book, Weapons of Mass Destruction.
That's awesome. Yeah, so just as a time check, we're at 5. I'm wondering, I feel like if we take like 15 minutes max, we could actually make this list look a little more reasonable. And so I'm wondering, first, if maybe, Matt, could you say something about the one at the bottom?
The network science one?
Yeah.
So I don't know how thoroughly established this term is as a term of art beyond Barabasi, and he uses this term, but he's extremely prolific and very influential, so maybe that's good enough. And basically, he's a physicist who applies a lot of these physics principles of studying and analyzing the behaviors of networks and applies them to anything that looks like a network. So he applies them to things like citation networks and how credit allocation occurs in scientific publications and things like that. And I want to dig into, this is like personal interest. So if we added, like, I'm going to be reading it, I'd love to discuss it. But if it doesn't fit, doesn't fit. I'm still going to read it. Of his more essential stuff that is analyzing in slightly more in the abstract of the behaviors and structures of networks. One of the topics that comes up there is this notion of control theory, which I want to find the source papers for that theory and read those. It's control theory in the sense of when you have a network, a complex network, what are the means and levers of control in that complex network, which might be a complex machine, might be a biological system, etc.
Super interesting, Matt said, like, I'm aware of like network analysis in academia. That's kind of, people will apply it to a broad range of things, so social networks and to technical ones. I mean, it sounds like there might be a connection to some systems thinking, or like, you know, some influence in the background if you're talking about like control mechanisms, and like also thinking about the span across biological and mechanistic networks. So yeah, interesting. Cool. Okay, so I wonder if I think Matt too, maybe in particular, you had some of the most thoughts about breaking things out, but I wonder if we just want to take a look at what these are now and see if there's a couple of groupings, and then maybe have a conversation about almost trying to prioritize some of them, because I already feel like we have enough that we could probably dig up a few that people are immediately interested in. And if one of you recognizes these as yours, or you have like a friendly amendment, I think you should feel free to make it, or make it in a bullet point underneath, but like keep them grouped, because I think that there's a lot on here, but actually there's a few that are so close that we might want to just treat them as a nested topic. So let's just try working together on the list for a couple minutes in that way, and then we'll kind of start prioritizing. So not prioritizing yet, just a little bit of cleaning together. Cleaning data together. Sorry. So we're kind of at 10 minutes after. Do people want another second, or do we want to just chat a bit about it and then maybe do some ranking?
I'm down to rank and chat.
And this is maybe also not final, so there's still time. But I think what we could do is sort of float to the top, the ones that we think are most exciting. I have no idea how to best accomplish this. And Matt, that it looked like you had a thought, if you want to.
Yeah, there's just three things rather than rearranging, I was just going to throw them out when we're discussing. There are a couple that I think it would help to have one installment that's just revisiting, like, again, revisit the topic of like, what is decentralization, right? And there's a couple of these that we could group together under that heading. Then there were a history of private life. I didn't know who had added that, so I didn't know whether we could tie that together with surveillance and have one that's around that sense of privacy and surveillance. So I left it alone, but we could group those. And then, the question to pose, looking at this list, since we now have articulated our mission to explicitly use the term civics, didn't we? We actually used the term civics. Does this, I want to be more knowledgeable about what that term means. And I don't know whether we could just use these topics and thread in references that give us a basis in that, or should we declare a topic? Am I suggesting a separate topic that's just not on the list yet? That's civics.
I really like the idea of grouping topics like you just did with decentralization. That one that was really interesting, really useful. I think civics could probably do the same kind of thing.
Yeah, I would suggest it could be its own topic, because there's like enough literature on it, especially some literature around digital, like making digital civics. And yeah.
Good. I want to read it all. So, and also even honestly, like, what's my starting point? Just like go read Plato's Republic, right? Like it's, there's.
Only read the part at the end where he reveals the trick, so you can start out angry with him. That's my recommendation.
So, but that's like, I mean, that's where I'm at. Like, I want to be informed about this, and I want to be informed about the whole big picture of what am I referencing when I use the term civics, and I don't even know where to start. Well, I have a vague sense of where to start, but
yeah, I know who to start. I think Pat Kahn and Liz Berry are both great people to talk to on this subject. In particular, I think just even starting with the topic that I think opened up with the problematization of citizen science and this and how that has been a question mark that I think LD and has a lot to offer on. And mainly because if you ask Liz any of these things, she gives you authors.
All right. Cool. What is decentralization? Ownership, intellectual property. So I would put the intellectual property stuff under ownership.
Okay, I feel like the one that feels the most intense is sort of on the second page. So no one decided to bust out the data, and I think Matt said you flagged stewardship more broadly, and I wonder if we almost would want stewardship as an umbrella concept, because we use that term a lot, and then put data stewardship under it. Mm-hmm. The other word that we talk a lot about, or we have thoughts about in our values potentially, is trust, and I wonder if there's a way we want to address that differently than how it's currently figured on here.
Yeah. Yes, we should have trust as a topic, and there are so many ways we could tease that open.
Yeah, but I really wonder about like whether like data civics and trust to me all feel like really high level things that like I don't want to be cognizant to not grab too many of them at once. Like data is like a phrase like design in my mind now. It's just so watery. It has no, like, doesn't hold any weight for me anymore.
I mean, I think kind of what we did in the previous round, which we could consider here sort of cutting off that is like, you know, we took watery words like justice and privacy and had like a very specific take on them, which doesn't make them less watery. Actually, it recalls to mind this notion in philosophy of contested concepts. So it's like, it's sort of like wicked problems, but not. It's just like, there are some concepts that are maybe about the fighting over them and wrestling with them rather than knowing that there will be one definition that everyone agrees to. So.
And that's also a good example. Like privacy is kind of watery, and the direction we took it ended up not tackling surveillance so much as I didn't feel like we covered it as much as I wanted to. So we just added to the list for the next time. But you also didn't suggest just data in general, Don. You said, because you said stewardship, and then you said another data stewardship within that. But you suggested something else. Now I'm blanking.
I said to bucket the data, like have a stewardship conversation, but make sure we address data stewardship in it. But I feel like there's probably other ways of thinking about stewardship, which would be cool. The other ones that Brendan mentioned were trust and civics. I would support just a trust topic, but I think it's big, right? Because you're right, we could talk about it from like a finance perspective. That's kind of strange. There is like a data trustworthiness that came in before too.
It's like super deep origins in philosophy, right? Like it's like a ton of like origin of trust, origin of knowledge stuff you get into, which we won't, but.
I mean, we do have that involved. I mean, doing like, what exactly is a fact?
Like you say the word trust, and like my brain goes to the cogito.
Like,
right? It's like I'm like
verifiability and reproducibility.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, like all this like Ludwig Fleck making of a scientific fact. There's some like great. There's a whole. I mean, we sort of have this part where we reference feminist science studies, but also just science studies more broadly. I think could offer a lot to thinking about any of the things that we flagged. Yeah, so actually the other one I wanted to check in on, oh, sorry, go first, Kelsey.
This is brief, but I was curious to hear, so one of the reasons this is really exciting to me, and Brendan, I heard this from you too, is that it's highly academic and we get to talk to people who are really experts in it. But Don, while we're crafting this list, I know that you're like in academia, and maybe I'm wondering if you wanted to specifically ask for like non-academic topics to be covered. Like I think we have people who, like Brendan is a startup guy and I've been in that position too, and we have some strange industry expertise that like maybe you don't get to know about. Is that somewhere we want to go, or do we want to try and, I know it's a bit late in the session to say this, sorry.
No, I mean, that's totally fine. I think we've talked about this before, and I think there's totally interest. We had almost talked about it as doing like app walkthroughs. Like I think there was a way that we definitely said we wanted to think about like approaching the technologies in a certain way that I still think is really cool. I mean, I feel like I have a tendency, which I struggle against, which is to make everything I read about academic stuff. I'm so sorry. I like think I just can't stop it right now. But I also think a lot of these topics, and what I try to do is draw from community sources. So when I think about things like civics, like I actually immediately come to mind, like say the Center for Urban Pedagogy or like community neighborhood technology projects. So like I would hope that we don't only draw from academic sources. And I think a lot of these topics are big enough that they wouldn't be. But I am mindful that this is a mode that inclines toward that. And like, I don't want to only do that, though I do accidentally do it all the time. Yeah, go Brendan. And then I'm just going to do a time check on us and maybe try and bring us to a graceful close.
Yeah, I think, Kelsey, I'm really with you on that. I feel like what we have here is like more than semester's worth. And so it might be fun to think about this as like semester in brackets. But it might be fun to think about some of our sort of sideband, like we talked in the past about like walking through types of algorithms or walking through apps specifically. It could be fun to think about that as like a stretch goal. Like, can we take one of these topics and fold in like a sort of sidebar meeting that's halfway between the other two, that's totally optional for others, but it's sort of informed by some of the topics. Like I think like obviously like I can ramble on about trust and our approach to it ad nauseum. That might not be interesting to others, but it might be. Or we could pull someone else's technology off the shelf and like talk about it. And there are lots of nerds around who could sort of speak to some of that. But I think it'd be really fun to like, again, I think one of the key takeaways we're getting here is like some structure and some planning ahead of time. So it'd be really great if we tried to keep that. But I personally think it would be a great stretch goal for this.
Okay, so just thinking about this, we've definitely, I think this is already a super rich amount of things to kind of work with. And we've bolded a couple. And I wonder so let's imagine the ones we bolded are the ones that we want to prioritize and like float them to the top. And then maybe just do a quick check-in with each other. Oh no, my formatting is gonna not work. Ah! Okay, don't watch me, I'm a monster. And then see if those are the important ones, or if there's a way that we want to we want to surface another one or rank them lower. So knowledge commons, yeah, as a follow-up. I think it's nice to kind of draw on some of explicitly threads that were raised. The fitting alternatives one, and I think there was only one more. I think I've lost it. Stewardship, okay. So, oops, do people, when they see that, does that feel like that hit the high notes of this list for them? And like, okay, this is like rough consensus. Trust, right? Oh yeah, trust, okay.
Who put trustworthy repositories in there?
Oh, I had that from, it came in from, I think, Jax.
All right.
We do not have to read about it, but.
I have a lot of professional history with that term.
Wow, you could facilitate the trust session. Not obligated. You could facilitate one you're more excited.
Well, it's such a different meaning of trust from how I've been thinking about it in the last couple of years. That it's like, oh yeah, wait, that term.
Okay, that one feels like that one, and maybe to some degree stewardship feels like it would need a little more under it. Oh, interesting that someone put care under stewardship. Okay, that could be cool.
Well, that you could apply ethics of care to stewardship, and there's also what's his name? I don't know why I'm blanking on his name. School for Poetic Computation does Tayun does these networks of care. It's sort of whenever he does workshops about stewardship, he uses that term.
Cool. Yeah. Okay. So those 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Those feel like the high notes for this call right now. So we can sort of, we'll have this full long list. And Kate, you flagged this, Matt said, it might be helpful if we leave this in doc form for a while to collect ideas. Does that feel accurate? So
yeah, people can comment and suggest.
So in terms of to-dos, I was gonna update the facilitation section of the README. And then I can also just post this into a cleanup doc. Post reading list. And I might connect to Rob and ask for help. Registrar opening. Registration begins.
Ooh, let's talk about Byzantine fault tolerance.
Sure.
And also maybe I'll reconnect with Eric because I know he's indicated an interest.
Cool. Are we divvying up or are we all leaving?
Divvying up what?
Topics.
I mean, I have
Really?
time, but I think if there's one that you're sort of potentially interested in, I think you should feel like happy to say you're potentially interested, but it's not, I think, quite at the stage to claim it.
Let's just comment. You can comment on the title and say, I volunteer, and like multiple people can volunteer.
I volunteer as tribute.
Okay, I am excited to see y'all volunteer. I might not volunteer for a while on that. Oh, the pairing thing. I think someone say if they want to pair. Yeah, so why don't we do that?
Well, I'm willing to pair on any of these. Should I include that in each of my comments?
Yes.
Happy to pair. Okay.
This is so good. I feel like we did a thing.
Yeah, so actually the one bullet point I put under the agenda item was, and Kelsey perceptively raised this, that we have all these OKRs, but we haven't quite tracked who said they're doing any of them. So if you look at the doc that was like the annual goals from the meeting, we kind of did a brain dump of who had said they were doing parts of what. So just flagging that and maintain a regular reading group is one of it. So in some way, all of you who are facilitating and showing up are participating in that, but we might need to say someone who's taking on the semester admin role might want to be the person who sort of knows in the back of their mind that this is a goal we committed to annually. So I really misjudged the amount of time this took. It took an hour and a half. Should have just done the original time. But thank you all for sticking through. Are there any last bits that people want to surface before we go? Okay. Let's say goodbye now. I mean,
Bye,
you don't
everyone.
have to, but I might.
Kevin, thank you so much for these notes. These are amazing. I'm just reading through these. It's like super helpful.
No problem.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank
Bye,
you, everyone. Take care.
Okay, bye.
Bye-bye.